Spain's largest wildfire of the year just became the largest wildfire in the history of an entire region. It is still growing right now, and a new heat wave is about to push conditions even further into extreme danger territory. Let's break down exactly where things stand today, how bad this could still get, and why officials are genuinely worried the worst is still ahead of us. The fire is called La Mierla, and it's burning through the Sierra Norte area of Guadalajara province in the Castilla-La Mancha region, roughly 100 kilometers north of Madrid. As of Monday, the blaze had scorched more than 26,000 hectares, with a fire perimeter stretching around 120 kilometers. To put that scale in perspective, that's an area of scorched land, roughly equivalent NT to the entire city of Edinburgh, all burned in the span of just a few days. And here's the part that should stop you cold. This fire has now officially surpassed the 2005 La Riba de Sailicas blaze to become the largest wildfire ever recorded in the history of Castilla-La Mancha. Not the largest this year, the largest ever documented in that region's history. This didn't happen overnight, and understanding how fast it built up matters for grasping just how quickly conditions can spiral. The fire was first detected on July the 16th in the Sierra Norte area of Guadalajara. Within days, by Saturday, it had already reached around 13,000 hectares, affecting more than 800 people, and forcing the evacuation of 21 municipalities. Officials at the US time described the fire advancing nearly 14 kilometers in a single night. By Sunday, the toll had climbed further, with additional evacuations ordered in places like Pradena de Atienza, Robledo de Corpus, Aldanueva de Guadalajara, and Najaros. And by Monday, the fire had effectively doubled again, crossing the 26,000 hectare mark, with more than 28 villages evacuated and around 1,200 people displaced from their homes. That's a fire that roughly doubled in size across a single weekend, and it's still burning as of right now. The regional government has been direct about the scale of the challenge here. Emiliano Garcia Page, the president of Castilla-La Mancha, said nearly 30 population centers are now effectively surrounded by the fire. Think about what that actually means on the ground. Dozens of towns and villages with flames on multiple sides, not just threatened from one direction, but genuinely encircled. Garcia Page has been clear that the priority right now is protecting lives and keeping the flames from reaching homes and urban centers, which tells you firefighting crews aren't necessarily trying to fully extinguish this fire in the near term. They're trying to contain and redirect it away from populated areas while it continues to burn through forest and scrubland. There is at least one piece of genuinely good news buried in all of this. As of the most recent update, officials have confirmed that, despite the scale of destruction, no homes have been damaged by the fire so far, though some industrial buildings have been affected. Regional officials have specifically emphasized that protecting residential structures has remained the top priority throughout this response, and so far that specific line has held even as the fire has grown dramatically in size. That's a genuinely significant achievement given the speed and scale of this blaze, but it also shows you exactly where all the available firefighting resources are being concentrated, on structure protection rather than full suppression of the fire itself. Let's talk about the response effort, because this has become a genuinely massive multi-region operation. As of Monday, roughly 149 personnel and 22 ground vehicles were actively working the fire under what's classified as Level 2 danger status. Castilla y León, a neighboring region, has now formally joined the coordination effort to help manage the response. In an unusual and pretty remarkable development, local farmers around the town of Atienza have been mobilizing their own tractors and agricultural equipment to plow fire breaks through cultivated fields, specifically working to create containment lines between the fire and the province of Soria. On Monday, farmers from La Toba constructed fire breaks in the areas of Congostrina and La Toba itself. This is a genuinely striking image. Ordinary agricultural workers using their own farm equipment to physically carve containment lines into the landscape, because the scale of this fire has outpaced what official resources alone can fully contain. Now, here's where this story gets significantly more urgent, because La Mierla is not burning in isolation. At the exact same time this fire has been raging through Guadalajara, a separate major wildfire has been burning in the Cinco Villas district of Zaragoza province, roughly 200 red kilometers away. That fire, which started around July 15th, has already burned more than 15,400 hectares of its own, forcing the evacuation of close to 1,000 people across villages in both Aragon and Navarra. There is at least some encouraging news on that front, with Aragon's regional government describing the Cinco Villas fire as stabilized and showing very favorable evolution, allowing evacuated residents from Malpica de Arba, Luesia, and Un Castillo to begin returning home. But the simple fact that Spain has had two separate wildfires, each burning more than 10,000 hectares simultaneously, is putting an enormous strain on the national firefighting resources that would otherwise be able to fully concentrate on either single blaze. Let's zoom out to the national picture, because these two fires alone don't capture the full scope of what Spain has been dealing with this year. According to the European Union's Copernicus Wildfire Monitoring Service, more than 104,000 hectares have already burned across Spain in 2026 alone. For comparison, France, the next most affected country in the European Union this year, has seen just under 42,000 hectares burned. That makes Spain, by a wide margin, the worst affected country in the entire European Union for wildfires this year. And this comes on top of an already exceptionally destructive fire season just last year, when Spain recorded 354,747 hectares burned and 63 separate large wildfires, the highest annual burned area the country has experienced in the past decade. So this isn't an isolated bad week. It's the continuation of a genuinely alarming multi-year trend of worsening wildfire seasons across the country. There's also a darker, more tragic backdrop to this entire wildfire season that deserves to be mentioned directly. Earlier this month, on July 9th, a separate and far deadlier wildfire broke out near Los Gallardos in Almería province, in the Andalusia region. That fire, driven by dry esparto grass, pastures, and low scrub, and occurring amid one of the deadly heat waves that has been circulating through Europe this summer, resulted T17. Additional injuries, and 10 people who remain missing. It forced the evacuation of more than 1,600 residents and affected the towns of Los Gallardos, Bedar, Antas, and Lubrin. That single fire is now recorded as the deadliest wildfire in the history of Andalusia and the third deadliest in the entire record. It had a history of Spain, so while La Mierla and the Cinco Villas fire have so far avoided major loss of life, this wildfire season has already proven capable of producing genuinely catastrophic human tolls. And that history is exactly why officials are treating the current fires with such extreme caution around evacuations. Even in towns, the flames haven't directly reached yet. Temperatures are forecast to climb above 40 degrees Celsius across much of the southeastern interior of the country, with some areas potentially reaching as high as 42 to 44 degrees Celsius by Thursday, as hot, dry air moves north from Africa. EMET has also specifically warned about the possibility of dry thunderstorms developing in mountainous parts of eastern Spain, which is exactly the kind of weather event that can spark entirely new fires through lightning strikes, without a single drop of rain reaching the ground to help contain them. Think about what that combination actually means for the fires already burning. La Mierla and Cinco Villas are currently being fought under conditions that are already extremely difficult, and both are expected to face several more days of rising heat, continued low humidity, and potentially new dry lightning activity by base. E4, this heat wave breaks on Thursday. Experts have pointed to a specific combination of factors driving the speed and intensity of this year's fires: elevated temperatures, strong winds, and low humidity, combined with unusually dense vegetation that built up following a rainy spring earlier this year. That's an important detail because it means the same wet weather that seemed like good news for Spain a few months ago actually helped create the exact fuel load that's now burning at this scale. Experts have also pointed to a longer-term structural factor behind these worsening fire seasons: the ongoing neglect of woodlands and the decline of traditional rural land management, combined with the broader effects of climate change, which together are creating conditions that make wildfires increasingly difficult to manage, even with modern firefighting resources. There's also a law enforcement angle worth mentioning, because not every fire this year has started naturally. In connection with the Cinco Villas fire in Zaragoza, a suspect was arrested on suspicion of arson, found carrying a lighter and other flammable materials, with a prior criminal record for similar offenses in other Spanish provinces. That doesn't mean every fire currently burning was deliberately set. Investigators haven't announced any similar findings connected to La Mierla. But it's a reminder that Spain's extreme fire risk this summer isn't only a matter of weather and vegetation, it's also creating conditions where a single act of arson can spiral into a fire covering tens of thousands of hectares within days. Let's talk about what happens if this pattern continues past Thursday. If the third heat wave of the year pushes temperatures into the low 40s across the interior, while La Mierla and Cinco Villas remain active, and if dry thunderstorms materialize in the eastern mountains as EMET has warned, Spain could realistically be looking at new ignition points opening up in parts of the country that aren't currently dealing with any active fires at all, stretching an already strained national firefighting system even further. The fact that a neighboring region, Castilla y León, has already had to formally join the coordination effort for La Mierla tells you the existing regional resources were already reaching their limits before this new heat wave has even fully arrived. For residents in the affected areas, and for anyone tracking this from outside Spain, here's what the situation actually looks like right now, in plain terms. 2 major wildfires are burning simultaneously in different parts of the country, one of which has just become the largest fire ever recorded in an entire region's history. I-30 population centers are surrounded by flames in Guadalajara alone. More than 1,200 people have been displaced from their homes in that fire specifically, with roughly another 1,000 displaced by the separate Zaragoza fire. So far, no homes have been destroyed in either of the two currently active major fires. A genuinely important achievement given the scale involved, though some industrial structures have been damaged. And now, layered on top of all of that, a new heat wave is arriving that's expected to push temperatures into the low 40s by Thursday, with dry lightning risk specifically flagged in mountainous eastern regions. Here's why this matters beyond Spain's borders, too. This wildfire season is unfolding as part of a broader pattern of extreme heat events affecting large parts of Europe this summer, and Spain's position as the worst affected country in the entire European Union this year is not an isolated national story. It's a data point in a much larger continental pattern of worsening fire seasons tied to rising temperature, and prolonged drought conditions. The comparison to France's far lower burned area this year underscores just how disproportionately hard Spain specifically has been hit in 2026. And last year's record-breaking fire season suggests this isn't a one-off anomaly, but part of an accelerating trend playing out year after year. So, what should you actually be watching for over the next few days? Watch whether La Mirla's growth slows at all before Thursday, given that officials are already describing containment lines being built by both official crews and volunteer farmers working in parallel. Watch whether the Cinco Villas fire's currently favorable, stabilizing trend holds, since that's the one genuine piece of good news in this story right now, and whether evacuated residents there are able to fully return home as planned. Watch Amet's Heatwave forecast closely. Through Thursday, since the specific temperature peak expected in the low 40s, combined with any dry thunderstorm activity in the eastern mountains, represents the single biggest wildcard for whether this situation gets meaningfully worse or begins to stabilize. And watch whether any new ignition points emerge elsewhere in the country during this heat wave, since Spain's firefighting resources are already stretched thin across two major simultaneous fires before this next wave of extreme heat has even fully arrived. The honest, sobering reality is that Spain is currently fighting its two largest wildfires of the year at the same time, one of which just became the largest ever recorded in its region's entire history, while heading straight into several more. Days of extreme heat that officials themselves are warning could push conditions into even more dangerous territory. The worst may genuinely still be ahead, and the coming days through Thursday are going to be the real test of whether this fire season stays contained to what's already burned, or whether Spain ends up adding even more entries to what's already one of its most destructive wildfire years on record. Let's go back and walk through the shelter and evacuation logistics in more detail, because the human side of this story often gets lost behind the hectare counts and percentage figures. As more towns have been added to the evacuation list around La Mirla, authorities in Castilla-La Mancha have been preparing additional shelter capacity in Guadalajara city itself, in case evacuees need a location beyond what's already been arranged closer to the fire. Officials have specifically noted that evacuations are being carried out calmly and with adequate lead time, precisely because the fire has not yet reached most of the newly evacuated towns, giving residents the option to either stay with family and friends in unaffected areas or make use of the shelter facilities the regional GU government has already established, including one specifically set up in the town of Jimenez. That distinction matters. This isn't a scenario of people fleeing flames at their doorstep in a chaotic scramble. It's a more deliberate, staged evacuation process designed to move PAO pool out of harm's way well before the fire front actually arrives, which is part of why, despite the enormous scale of this blaze, no fatalities have been reported in connection with La Mirla itself so far. It's also worth understanding exactly how the firefighting effort has scaled up day by day, because the numbers tell their own story about how seriously this has been treated at the regional and national level. In the early phase of the response over the weekend, around 15 personnel were deployed alongside 8 aircraft and 33 ground vehicles. By the following day, those numbers had grown substantially, with roughly 440 additional personnel brought in and aerial resources expanding to as many as 12 Anti-5 aircraft. That kind of rapid scaling, essentially doubling or more than doubling personnel within a single day, reflects just how quickly this fire outgrew the resources originally assigned to it, and it underscores why neighboring Castilla y León ultimately had to step in and formally join the coordination effort, rather than leaving this solely to Castilla-La Mancha's own regional resources. Let's talk about the ecological and agricultural toll here too, because a fire of this scale doesn't just threaten homes and displace residents, it reshapes the landscape itself for years afterward. The Sierra Norte area of Guadalajara, where La Mirla is burning, includes significant areas of natural parkland and forested terrain, and a burn scar covering more than 26,000 hectares represents a massive loss of tree cover, wildlife habitat, and topsoil stability that won't simply grow back the following spring. Burned hillsides lose their ability to absorb rainfall effectively, which raises the risk of flash flooding and soil erosion in the same areas for seasons afterward, particularly once autumn rains eventually arrive. For a region that also depends on agriculture and where local farmers have literally been out plowing fire breaks with their own tractors this week. The fire represents both an immediate threat to crops and livestock in its path, and a longer-term disruption to land that communities depend on economically well beyond this single fire season. There's a broader European dimension to this story, too, that's worth spending a little more time on, because Spain isn't fighting this alone in a vacuum, even if most of the personnel on the ground are Spanish. The European Union H has increasingly relied on shared firefighting resources during major wildfire events in member states, including coordinated aerial firefighting fleets and mutual aid arrangements between national fire services, precisely because summers like this one have become common enough that no single country can be expected to fully absorb a season like this using only its own domestic resources. The fact that Spain's burned area this year, over 104,000 hectares, dwarfs France's total of under 42,000 hectares, doesn't mean France has been spared serious wildfire risk. It means Spain in particular has become the epicenter of this year's European fire season, drawing attention and potentially additional coordinated support from across the continent as the crisis has escalated. It's also worth putting this into a global context, because Spain isn't the only country that's dealt with a catastrophic wildfire event so far in 2026. Earlier this year, in January, major wildfires broke out across Chile's Biobío and Ñuble regions, ultimately burning around 45,000 hectares, killing at least 21 people, injuring more than 75 others, and forcing over 50,000 people to evacuate, with roughly 800 structures destroyed. Chile's president declared a state of catastrophe in response. That event, occurring during the Southern Hemisphere's summer months back in January, is a reminder that this year's extreme fire behavior isn't confined to any single continent or hemisphere. It's part of a broader pattern of increasingly severe wildfire seasons appearing on multiple continents within the same calendar year, each driven by their own local combination of heat, drought, wind, and vegetation conditions, but all pointing toward the same underlying trend of worsening fire risk tied to a warming climate. Let's come back to Spain specifically and talk about the smoke and air quality dimension, because that's an aspect of wildfire disasters that often gets underreported compared to the direct destruction of the flames themselves. Images from the Cinco Villas fire in Zaragoza showed the sun partially obscured by smoke drifting over towns like Feresdues, and with two major fires burning simultaneously in different parts of the country, smoke plumes from both events have been affecting air quality across a wide swath of central and northeastern Spain. For residents in and around the affected provinces, even those not under direct evacuation orders, that means days of degraded air quality, respiratory irritation, and reduced visibility, compounding the disruption to daily life well beyond the specific municipalities that have been formally evacuated. Let's also address the economic dimension of a wildfire season at this scale, because it extends well past the immediate cost of firefighting operations themselves. Tourism, agriculture, and rural land value in the affected provinces all take a hit when fires burn at this scale. And the industrial buildings already damaged in the current fires represent direct, immediate financial losses on top of the broader disruption. Insurance costs for rural properties in high-risk areas have been trending upward across Spain for several years now as this pattern of increasingly severe fire seasons has continued. And a year like this one, following directly on the heels of last year's record-breaking fire season, with over 350,000 hectares burned, is likely to keep pushing that trend further in the same direction. Now, let's return to the most urgent, immediate question hanging over all of this, which is what happens between now and Thursday. EMET's forecast is specific enough to take seriously, temperatures climbing above 40 degrees Celsius across the southeastern Interior, with localized peaks potentially reaching 42 to 44 degrees by Thursday itself, as hot, dry air continues moving north from Africa. Firefighting crews at La Mierla and Cinco Villas are essentially racing against that forecast right now, trying to establish and reinforce containment lines while conditions remain merely difficult rather than becoming even more extreme. Every one of the specific tactics currently being used, the volunteer farmer firebreak S near Atienza, the reinforcement crews brought in from Castilla y León, the staged evacuation process designed to stay ahead of the fire's advance, all of it is being deployed specifically to try to get these two fires under firmer control before the heat genuinely peaks later this week. So here's the full picture as it stands right now. Two major wildfires are burning simultaneously across different regions of Spain. One of them, La Mierla, has just become the largest wildfire ever recorded in the history of Castilla-La Mancha. currently standing at more than 26,000 hectares burned, with nearly 30 population centers surrounded by flames. The other, Cinco Villas in Zaragoza, has burned over 15,000 hectares of its own, but is showing encouraging signs of stabilizing. No homes have been lost in either fire so far, though industrial structures have sustained damage and evacuations have so far avoided the kind of catastrophic loss of life seen earlier this month in the deadly Almeria wildfire that killed 13 people. Spain remains, by a wide margin, the worst affected country for wildfires in the entire European Union. On this year, continuing a trend that made last year the most destructive fire season the country has experienced in the past decade. And now, right as firefighting crews work to consolidate the gains they've made so far, a third heat wave of the year is arriving, expected to last through Thursday, with the potential to push temperatures high enough and dry conditions severe enough to make an already difficult firefighting effort significantly harder before it gets easier. Stay tuned for continued updates as this develops, because conditions on the ground are changing quickly, and there's clearly more still to come out of this story before the week is over.